I stood at the altar in a $40,000 dress, holding flowers, smiling for cameras, while secretly texting his business rival under the table. I married a man in a wheelchair because of his bank account, but by the time the reception ended, I was the one who couldn't stand. If you love stories where karma shows up dressed in a tuxedo, hit that like button right now, subscribe, and keep watching. You will not see this ending coming, I promise. My mother used to say that pretty girls with empty pockets learn to smile harder than anyone else. She said it like it was wisdom, like it was something to be proud of. I was 9 years old the first time I heard it, sitting in our kitchen with the peeling linoleum floor and the window that never closed all the way, watching her reapply lipstick before a date with a man whose name I didn't know. She caught me staring in the mirror's reflection and winked at me like we shared a secret. I think that was the moment something in me learned the wrong lesson, and I spent the next 20 years living by it. My name is Celine, and for most of my life I was surviving, just never in a way that anyone on the outside could see. I grew up watching my mother trade her warmth for security and end up with neither. She was beautiful, and she was desperate, and those two things together made her dangerous to herself. Every relationship was a transaction she convinced herself was romance. Every man was a solution dressed in cologne. She never said "I love you" without first calculating what it might cost her. And I watched all of it, I absorbed all of it, and I genuinely swore to myself that I would never be her. But the truth has a cruel sense of humor. By the time I was 29, I was $63,000 in debt. Credit cards, a personal loan I took out to furnish an apartment I couldn't afford, and a business I launched at 26 that quietly collapsed at 27 and took everything with it. I had built an entire life around the appearance of success: nice clothes, a good neighborhood, dinners at restaurants where the menu had no prices. I looked like a woman who had everything figured out. I had nothing figured out. I worked as an events coordinator for a mid-level firm in the city. It was good work. I was talented at it, genuinely talented, but it paid a salary that barely covered my performance of a life, let alone an actual one. And every night I came home to that nice apartment and sat with the quiet weight of all those numbers, all those statements, all those final notices I'd gotten good at ignoring, and I felt something I can only describe as a slow suffocation. I had no one to call. My mother and I hadn't spoken properly in 2 years. The friends I thought I had turned out to be fixtures of a social life I could no longer afford to maintain. When the brunches stopped, so did they. I was completely, profoundly alone. And loneliness, I have learned, is the most dangerous condition a person with bad instincts can be in. Because when you are that empty, and something that looks like a way out finally appears, you stop asking whether it's right. You just reach for it. And that is exactly what I did the night I walked into the Harrington Gala and saw Harlan Voss for the very first time. The morning of my wedding, I woke up before my alarm. I lay there in the hotel suite Harlan had booked for me, because even the night before our wedding, he was thinking about what would make me comfortable. And I stared at the ceiling in the dark and felt nothing. Not nerves, not excitement, not even guilt, just a cold, efficient readiness. Like a machine that had been built for one purpose and was finally about to be used, I told myself that was strength. I know now it was emptiness. The dress went on at 9, the veil at 10. By 11, I was standing in front of a floor-length mirror while 2 women I had hired fussed over my hair, and I was looking at my own reflection the way you look at a painting in a gallery, admiring it, studying it, feeling absolutely nothing personal about it at all. The woman in the mirror was perfect, white silk, soft curls, a face assembled for an occasion. I remember thinking, he is going to believe every single second of this. And then my phone buzzed. Dorian, one message. After today, you'll be set, and so will I. I deleted it without blinking, dropped the phone into my clutch, and picked up my bouquet. I had no one to call. My mother and I hadn't spoken properly in 2 years. The friends I thought I had turned out to be fixtures of a social life I could no longer afford to maintain. The estate was the most beautiful place I had ever stood in. 200 guests in white chairs, flowers everywhere, afternoon light pouring through the tall windows like something from a painting. The string quartet was playing something soft and aching, and every single person in that room turned to watch me as the doors opened. And then I saw Harlan. He was at the altar in a charcoal suit, his wheelchair positioned with quiet dignity at the front of the aisle, and he was looking at me the way I had never been looked at in my entire life. Not like a solution, not like an appearance, like I was something precious, like I was something worth waiting for. His eyes were full, genuinely full, and I watched him press his lips together the way people do when they are trying not to cry in public. Something moved in my chest, something I quickly buried. I walked toward him slowly, and the room held its breath, and for exactly 12 seconds I let myself pretend that I was the woman he believed I was, that I deserved that look, that this was real. 12 seconds, that was all I allowed myself. Then I was beside him. The officiant began. Harlan reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and certain, and leaned forward and whispered 4 words into the small space between us. "You saved me, Celine." The words landed somewhere deep and unprotected inside me, and I smiled, and I said nothing. And then the screen behind the altar turned on. It was supposed to show our photographs, a slideshow his assistant had prepared, pictures of us at dinners, at the gala where we met, candid moments from the past 8 months that Harlan had quietly collected, because he was, at his core, a man who cherished things. Instead, there was text, transcripts, emails, a date-stamped call log, and then the audio began to play. My voice, coming through the speakers of a room containing every person either of us had ever invited into our lives. My voice relaxed and laughing, saying things I cannot bring myself to fully repeat here. But I will tell you the worst of it. The line that made the entire room go silent in a way I have never experienced before or since. My own voice calling the man whose hand I was holding. The wheelchair meal ticket. The quartet stopped playing. 200 people stopped breathing. Breathing, and Harlan? Harlan slowly turned his head and looked at me, not with rage, not with tears, with something so much harder than either of those things. He looked at me with clarity, like a man who had already grieved this, already processed it, already decided exactly what he was going to do, and was simply now watching it conclude. He had known. He had known for 9 days. I opened my mouth. I don't know what I planned to say. There were no words in existence designed for that moment. The clutch in my hands was shaking. The flowers were shaking. I was shaking, and not because I was sad, not yet, but because the absolute totality of my exposure was only just beginning to reach me. Every wall I had ever built, every performance, every careful, calculated version of myself I had constructed and maintained. All of it, dissolving, in real time, in front of everyone. Harlan released my hand. He straightened in his chair, and with a composure that I will spend the rest of my life envying, he addressed the room. His voice was quiet, controlled. He said the wedding would not be proceeding. He thanked his guests for coming. He said he was sorry they had witnessed this, and that there would be no further disruption. Then he looked at me one final time and said something I have carried with me every single day since. I hope whatever you were paid was worth more than your integrity, because that is all you are leaving here with today. Security appeared at my elbow seconds later. Gently but completely, I was guided back down the aisle, the same aisle I had walked down 60 seconds ago believing I had won, and out through the doors. The last thing I saw before they closed behind me was Nora. She was sitting in the front row, watching me leave, and she was not smiling. She was not gloating. She just looked at me with those steady 14-year-old eyes and slowly nodded once, like she was closing a chapter she had already finished reading. The doors shut, and the most expensive, most perfectly constructed lie of my entire life was over. Karma doesn't knock. It doesn't warn you. It doesn't send a letter or leave a voicemail or give you a single graceful moment to prepare yourself. It just arrives, quietly, completely, and it sits down across from you and spreads everything you ever did across the table like a hand of cards, and it doesn't even need to say anything, because you already know what you're looking at. I learned that in the 48 hours after those doors closed behind me. I sat in the back of a car I had ordered with shaking hands, still in my wedding dress, still holding flowers I didn't know how to put down, and I watched my phone fill up with notifications the way water fills a sinking room, fast, then faster, then all at once. Someone had filmed it. Of course someone had filmed it. We live in a world where 200 people carry cameras in their pockets, and heartbreak is content, and a stranger's worst moment is an opportunity for engagement. The footage was blurry and angled and completely, devastatingly clear. My voice through those speakers, Harlan's face, the silence of that room, my walk back down the aisle. By midnight, it had been viewed 400,000 times. By the following morning, it was everywhere. I turned my phone face down and sat in the dark of my apartment, my expensive, debt-funded apartment, and I felt the architecture of my life begin to collapse floor by floor. Not dramatically, not all at once, just steadily, quietly, the way old buildings fall when the foundation finally gives out. My employer called on Monday. The conversation was brief and professional and final. Events coordination is an industry built entirely on trust and reputation, and mine had been publicly dismantled in under 4 minutes of viral footage. There was no version of my career that survived what that weekend had broadcast to the world. I understood. I didn't argue. I hung up and sat very still for a long time. Then Dorian's world began to unravel too. The financial arrangement between us, the one I had convinced myself was harmless, victimless, just two people helping each other, turned out to be something federal investigators had a very specific and very serious name for. The transcripts that played at the wedding had been handed to the appropriate authorities by Harlan's legal team weeks before the ceremony. By the time I lost my job, Dorian was already under investigation. Within 3 months, his firm was dissolved, his assets frozen, his name attached permanently to a case that would follow him for years. He sent me one message through a third party before everything closed in on him completely. 2 words, "Worth it?" I never responded, because we both already knew the answer, and then came the silence. That was the part nobody films, nobody posts, nobody watches. The silence that moves in after the chaos leaves and just stays. The absence of a phone that no longer rings because there is no one left to call. The absence of plans and weekends and the small social architecture of a life that had been built, I now understood, entirely on surfaces. My mother saw the footage. She called once. The conversation lasted 4 minutes and left me feeling more alone than the silence had. Some wounds, I realized, have been open so long that neither person remembers what caused them anymore. We just keep hurting each other from muscle memory. I sat in my apartment surrounded by beautiful things I couldn't afford, in a life I had constructed entirely as a performance, and I felt the full weight of what I had actually lost. Not Harlan's money, not the wedding, not the dress or the estate or the future I had calculated so carefully. I had lost the last version of myself that could still pretend. And that pretending, I realized, that endless, exhausting performance of being someone I wasn't, had been the only thing holding me together for years. Without it, there was just me, just Celine. Sitting alone in the wreckage of every choice she had ever made, finally out of angles, finally out of smiles, finally out of plans. Just the debt, just the silence, just the truth, And the truth, it turned out, was the one thing I had never once known how to survive. There is a specific kind of quiet that comes after you have lost everything you built, not the peaceful kind, not the restful kind, the kind that sits heavy on your chest at 3 a.m. when the whole world is asleep and you are lying in the dark, completely unable to outrun your own thoughts, the kind that makes the ceiling feel very low and the room feel very small, and your own heartbeat feel like an accusation. That was my quiet. For a very long time, that was all I had. I found a therapist 4 months after the wedding that never was. Her name was Dr. Osei, and she had an office with one small plant on the windowsill that I stared at during our first 6 sessions, because I couldn't bring myself to make eye contact with someone who was asking me questions I had spent my entire life running from. She asked me once, gently, without judgment, when was the last time I had let someone take care of me without immediately calculating the cost? I opened my mouth to answer, and I sat there in silence for so long that she quietly handed me a tissue before I even realized I was crying. That was the first honest moment I had experienced in longer than I could remember. And it cracked something open in me that I think had needed cracking for 20 years. I got a small job at a nonprofit that helped young women transitioning out of difficult home situations. The pay was a fraction of what I used to earn. The office had fluorescent lighting and a coffee machine that only worked on certain days, and absolutely no prestige attached to it whatsoever. I loved it in a way I had never loved anything I did for money, because for the first time in my adult life, I was in a room full of people who needed something real, not a performance, not a polished version, not the smile I had spent decades perfecting. They needed presence. They needed someone who had made mistakes and survived them and could sit across from a young woman who felt completely trapped and say, "I understand that feeling. I lived inside it. And I want to tell you there is a way through. I don't know if I am a good person yet. I'm not sure I've earned that description, but I am an honest one, finally, painfully, completely, and Harlan. I think about Harlan more than I have ever admitted out loud. Not with longing, not with the hollow ache of someone who lost a fortune, but with something quieter and harder to name, something that feels, if I am being fully truthful, like grief for who I could have been if I had just been brave enough to be real with him from the beginning. Because here is what I know now that I did not know then. Harlan Voss was not vulnerable. He was not a target. He was not diminished by his wheelchair or his grief or his loneliness. He was the most whole person I have ever stood next to in my life. A man who had lost everything, his health, his wife, the physical life he had known, and had chosen every single day to remain open, to remain kind, to remain present for his daughter and generous to strangers, and quietly, immovably decent in a world that gives you every reason not to be. I looked at all of that and saw weakness. That tells you everything about where I was and nothing about who he was. I heard through someone who knew someone that Harlan took Nora traveling for 6 months after the wedding, that he launched a foundation in his late wife's name, that he was photographed at a small dinner with close friends, laughing, genuinely laughing, and that he looked by every account like a man who had set something heavy down and kept walking. He didn't need saving. He never did. I was the one who needed saving. I just spent 8 months standing next to the one person who might have actually helped me find my way, and I treated him like a transaction. That is the thing about karma that nobody tells you. It doesn't just take away what you tried to steal. It shows you in devastating and precise detail exactly what you threw away. I am not okay yet. I want to be honest about that because I think there is something dangerous about stories that wrap up too cleanly, that turn devastation into a tidy lesson with a bow on top. Real life doesn't do that. Real healing is slow and non-linear, and some days it looks like progress, And some days it looks like sitting in your car in a parking lot for 20 minutes because you don't quite have the strength to go inside yet. But I am honest now, and I am present now, and I am learning, slowly, imperfectly, one fluorescent-lit morning at a time, what it feels like to build a life that actually belongs to me. Not a performance, not a calculation, not a plan, a life. Harlan once told me on a quiet evening 3 months into our relationship that the accident that took his mobility had given him something he hadn't expected. He said it gave him the ability to tell, almost immediately, who people really were. Because when the money and the status and the physical presence are stripped away, he said, you find out very quickly who stays and who was never really there. I thought I was fooling him. He was reading me the entire time. He didn't need the wheelchair. I was the one who couldn't move. And learning to walk again, not on my feet, but in my soul, has been the longest, loneliest, most necessary journey of my entire life. And that is the story of the wedding day that changed everything, not just for Harlan, not just for Nora, but for me, the woman who thought she had it all figured out and walked into that estate with a plan and walked out with nothing but the truth. If this story moved you, if any part of it felt familiar or painful, or made you think of someone you know, please give this video a like right now. It takes 1 second, and it means more than you know. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this channel exists for exactly these kinds of stories, the ones nobody talks about, the ones that are messy and human and real, the ones where karma doesn't arrive with thunder and lightning, but with quiet, absolute, unignorable precision. And share this, please. Think of one person who needs to be reminded that how you treat people, especially people the world has already underestimated, matters. Send it to them today. Drop in the comments, did you see that twist coming? And tell me which moment hit you the hardest. I read every single one. Until next time, be real, be kind, and remember that the most powerful person in any room is almost never the one you expected.